Mark Marinier opens the door with a sad expression on his face and enters the library where Kathy and Peter are sitting. He emotionally informs Kathy that he is getting a divorce tomorrow. Kathy leaves her chair and wraps her arms around him. She sympathizes with him and states that she feels sorry knowing about his divorce. Kathy expresses her sadness for Mark and keeps hugging him. Peter is sitting beside Kathy and gives Mark his reassurances. Kathy teases Peter that he is jealous of her and Mark. This claim seems to annoy Peter, who stands from his place. He retaliates by taunting Kathy about her newly learned English from watching porn on the internet. She doesn't shy away and keeps her hand on his shoulder, teasing him more by making seductive voices. Mark follows Peter and Kathy while they are having a funny argument. Mark stays quiet, deep in thought, and leaves the library with Peter and Kathy. Mark arrives at the court where a lot of people are waiting for their turn. Femme shouts and expresses her rage towards her husband, stating that she never liked him and wasted her life with him. She desperately wants a divorce. Some men sitting beside her complain about their wives while Mark sits in a corner with his lawyer. An idea pops up in Mark's mind and he shares it with his lawyer. He is a strong believer that everyone should visit a court at least once before getting married to be vaccinated for married life. Finally, the attendant calls Mark's name and their turn comes. Mark follows his lawyer inside the room and sits beside his wife, Anne, in front of the judge. He shares with the judge that he tried to get back with Anne but ended up getting a punch in his eye. The judge asks for confirmation from Anne that she no longer wants Mark as her husband. Anne willingly assures the judge of her decision. The judge similarly questions Mark that he no longer wants Anne as her wife. Mark questions the judge about whether he will still get 6,000 euros if he says no. The judge mentions that it was a fair deal, after which he announces that from now onwards, Mark and Anne are officially divorced. He delivers the good news to Mark and Anne that they can hate each other now. Anne's response to this is that she already hated Mark. Anne leaves the room with her and Mark's lawyer while he stays back, continuing to interrogate the judge, who seems uninterested in Mark's blabbering, and calls the next case to his table. After the divorce, Mark goes to a bar to forget his awful situation. He parks his bike outside and tries to enter with the helmet still on, which gets him a reminder from the bouncer that he must remove it before entering. He finally enters, stepping in between the girls, and greets the bartender. She teases Mark about Anne before he depressingly informs her about his divorce. He adds that his wife left with Mark Levy. The girl tries to distract Mark and offers him some shots. Mark drinks 3 of them, after which he starts talking to himself. Mark comes home and sits at his dining table with his laptop on. He watches a couple singing on his screen and feels even more depressed. He goes on to open his closet and takes out his tie. After taking one more shot of alcohol, he leaves a note on his laptop. Then, he places a chair on the floor, wears a noose around using the tie to the ceiling. In this way, he attempts in grief. 36 hours later, he comes back to his consciousness when his self-cleaning robot comes and checks up on him. He gathers himself up and sits on the table, throwing away the note he left on his laptop. He starts typing for his new script about love. This causes him to remember the time he spent writing his past books about his love life and divorce. The next morning, he calls someone and informs them about his new script. After this, he heads to a bar to celebrate, where he sits among girls passing him alcohol in a horny mood. Everyone is busy dancing, but he continues to just sit in a pissed mood. He wakes up in his bed, surrounded by his... As he comes back to his senses, he notices Mark Levy on his television screen. He aggressively turns off his television abruptly but ends up hurting himself badly. This is when he hears his doorbell ring. He opens the door and smiles as he sees Alice on the other side. He expresses how beautiful he finds her and insinuates that she might be the reason for his divorce. He loses himself in the thoughts of the day when he met Alice for the first time. He is at the church attending his grandmother's funeral when his father brings a girl with him. This leads to his parents getting into a quarrel until the priest instructs them to be quiet. Then the priest enunciates in Aramaic language when everyone hears the laughter of a girl. This is when Mark notices Alice. They meet after the funeral when she appreciates his work. As their conversation continues, his attention moves towards her chest. She catches him looking and begins talking about her breast size. She finally leaves after giving him a tight goodbye hug. In the garden, everyone is enjoying their drinks after the funeral. He stands and stares at Alice from a safe distance while she chats with Jean Georges, who later brings Mark in on Alice's notice. As she glares at him, he gets nervous and bumps into the pile of wine glasses beside him. Jean approaches Mark and suggests he make a move toward Alice by taking some children's help. He does not take Jean seriously, but she moves towards the kids nevertheless to plan something. He sits on the rocks in a corner away from the crowd when Alice joins him from the back. She sits down to give him company and interrogates him about the bottle of champagne that he stole earlier. He grabs the bottle and pours the champagne into her glass. She shows interest in listening to the song that Mark is playing on his earphones. As a result, he hands over his earphones to her, which makes her get excited. When she listens to similar music, she starts singing. She seems to adore nature and he seems to adore her. After some time, she expresses her desire to dive and runs towards the sea with him following her. There are plenty of motorboats at the seashore. They sit inside the boat with a bottle of champagne in Alice's hand. He begins a conversation with Alice regarding his past and childhood. but she cuts Mark's statement in between and questions about his wife. Mark hesitantly informs Alice about Anne and her family, and they continue the conversation. In between their conversation, a young girl interrupts Mark and Alice. The young girl poses the question of whether Alice and Mark are lovers. The girl further questions Mark if he swims, but he refuses, so Alice rushes towards the shore, takes off her black dress, and dives into the sea. The girl mocks Mark for not being capable enough to make any move on his own, and he eventually accepts his foolishness. Coming out of memories, he observes Alice closely, standing at his door. Alice warns Mark that he must stop sending her his addresses and codes because her husband, who is also Mark's cousin, might find out. However, he is not very bothered about her statement and casually states that she must not have only come to say this. He keeps insisting that Alice wants to meet him but would not accept the truth. Alice enters his home and takes a look at the condition of the room. She questions Mark about his foot, and he makes up the excuse that he bashed it on his television. Alice commands him to show his foot to her and examines it closely, to reach the conclusion that he must go to the hospital urgently to get it treated due to hygiene. She drives him to the hospital in her car. Her rash driving makes him feel nauseous, so he tries to convey his condition in time. However, he loses control and eventually pukes in her car. This causes her to stop the car, after which she gets out with him and they both vomit out on the street. Following this, they finally arrive at the hospital where the doctor checks his injury and decides to do an X-ray of his foot. This causes Mark to get scared about whether he will be able to walk again or not. Alice excuses herself to go to a grocery store and bring a few things while he holds her hand, requesting her to forget everything that happened that day. He doesn't want her to leave him, but she passes him a smile and goes away nevertheless, making it clear that they will not see each other again. Later, he sits in his study feeling lonely and types a text to Alice requesting her one more chance. But he seems confused and nervous as he can't think of the right words to express his feelings to her. No matter how much courage and thought went into his text, Alice didn't reply to it for 8 days. Next, he pays a visit to Peter and Kathy, who welcome him in and question him about his mental state. Mark expresses his sorrow to Peter, after which Kathy joins them too, so Peter translates Mark's statement to Kathy in English. It is during this visit that Peter and Katie excitedly announce the news of their upcoming marriage to him. He cannot believe his ears and wants to know if the lovesick couple is in their senses. Mark suggests Peter and Kathy go to the courtroom once and learn how marriages end in divorce. Kathy and Peter happily insist that they are sure about this decision, and even want Mark to be a witness from Peter's side. Mark instructs Peter to come with him to the bathroom to have a private chat. There, Mark agrees to be Peter's witness but still questions why his friend wants to marry Kathy. Peter simply replies that he loves Kathy, but this answer does not satisfy Mark. Peter further claims that Mark just wants to win the argument as he is bored and has nothing else to do right now. He, on the other hand, fully intends to own Kathy as his wife. In the end, Mark repeats that he completed his responsibility as Peter's friend to warn him about his decision. He emphasizes how love only decreases with time. But Peter has an opposite point of view and thinks that love increases with time. Eventually, Mark gives in for the sake of his friend's happiness and gives him a hug. Kathy opens the bathroom door and catches them in that moment. She hilariously accuses her fiancé of being gay. Mark is later waiting in a cafe for Alice to arrive. He imagines her entrance in different aspects and moods until she finally and actually enters, wearing a decent black dress with a red handbag. But she seems distracted as she clumsily stumbles into some plates beside her. Then, she takes a seat opposite Mark and begins the conversation, where he presents a few reasons for them to be together. She is in no mood for such grave conversations and takes it into a lighter note. He orders 2 glasses of wine, but she refuses and orders a cup of tea for herself. This makes Mark grow curious about her choices while she explains that she is not sure about being with him. Mark instantly gets defensive and opens his heart to her about how he was imagining her arrival in different settings in anticipation of meeting her. Nevertheless, Alice is adamant about them staying just friends, which confuses and irritates Mark. He clarifies that it is almost impossible to establish a friendship between a man and a woman, and it is better if they never see each other again. He acts as if he has deleted her phone number and pushes her to do the same. Once their meeting is over, Alice leaves the cafe with a smile on her face. Later, Mark is accompanied by Jean and Peter in the center of the street, sitting on a bench and observing each girl who passes them by on the street. Mark, Peter, and Jean analyze those girls from their appearances and form their perceptions about them accordingly. Peter and Jean inquire Mark about what his type is when it comes to a girl. Jean also wants to know about what happened with Alice so far, so Mark catches her up on all the recent developments. Peter finds Alice's proposition of staying friends reasonable, but Jean strongly reinforces that Mark must not call Alice again. Mark is in his study when he makes a call to Alice and agrees to be her friend. She talks to him while working and he asks her out to go on a walk with him. She turns him down, giving the excuse of being very busy with work. But he fails to take the hint and offers to come over to her workplace to have a walk with her. Alice likes the idea and accepts it, but now without explicitly reminding him that it is only going to be a friendly walk. Mark complies and hangs up the call with a smile on his face, after which he continues to type his script. Alice is completely engrossed in work when Mark gets there. She is busy with her recording and directing the actors to perform the scene with realism and intensity. She is giving the actors a demonstration of how to kiss someone passionately, and uses Mark as an example without even asking him. She starts kissing him without notice, which results in a blank expression on his face. He does not kiss her back, and she eventually stops out of embarrassment as well. This is when he senses her humiliation, so he grabs her and starts kissing her affectionately. Their kiss goes on for a while as they can't keep their hands to themselves when around each other. They end up spending the night together, during which the topic of their current situation comes up again. Mark asks Alice about whether she will ever leave her husband for him, but gets no reply. He keeps bombarding her with questions and she has no answers for him. He prompts her to open up, and she admits that as soon as she makes herself available for him, he will no longer have the same love and attraction towards her. The next day, Mark receives a rejection letter for his script, which states that he should not attempt to write more scripts. He goes on to open another letter which says that a publishing house is interested in his script. He immediately rushes to the publishing house, where he is introduced to a lady named Francesca Vernesi. She takes him inside her office and sits him down so they can further discuss the details. She mentions that she read his manuscript titled Love Lasts 3 Years and admires the quirky name he gave to his work. She comments that even though she had a bit of trouble getting into the script, she managed to find a subtle voice. She adds that they receive many novels, but this one stood out to her. She asks him to name the price, and he makes a demand for 60,000 euros to sell her his script. She continues the conversation without giving him a direct response. Mark later hangs out with Peter and Jean as they drink together while watching an old movie. When his friends learn about the news of Mark's script being approved for publishing, they want to know if he bothered to share this with Alice. Mark admits that he didn't inform Alice because he didn't want to come across as a misogynist. Peter warns him that Alice will eventually find out about this and will believe that Mark is a liar. Mark sets out on a journey to Basque with Alice via train. After reaching their destination, he expresses his desire to discuss something important with her, but she automatically assumes that he would pressurize her again to leave her husband. Mark reassures her that he wants to talk about something else, but then pushes her to choose between him and her husband. This results in Alice getting frustrated and saying that she can't make a decision without thinking, so she asks for some time. They sit by the ocean and enjoy a drink. He brings up the book and asks for Alice's 2 cents on the matter. Alice wonders what the author of the book thinks about himself and cluelessly confesses that she could not finish it because of how much she disliked it. She calls it a confusion between desire and love, which causes Mark to defend the book by arguing that it's good and liked by many people. She reacts with surprise after returning to her thoughts, and their day ends when they head back to their own city. Antoine enters his house with a bouquet of roses but finds Alice crying. Concerned, he asks her about what's wrong, but she responds that she is just tired. He gifts her the flowers in remembrance of their 3rd wedding anniversary. This brings a smile to her face. She jumps off the sofa and hurriedly runs over to her husband for a big, warm hug. But she starts tearing up again in his embrace, which worries Antoine. Despite his wife's assurances that she is shedding tears of joy, she ends up leaving the house with all of her stuff while Antoine tries to stop her. He reminds his wife of all the intimate moments that they had in this house, but she apologizes before walking out on him and moving out of their house. She shows up at Mark's doorstep and instantly jumps into his arms as soon as she sees him. Now that they're together, they have a great time dancing and enjoying themselves at a restaurant. The restaurant's patrons praise and compliment them for their talents and chemistry. Alice politely says thanks before taking leave on her and Mark's behalf. They leave the place feeling a bit drunk. They just wander around for a while until they find a grassy spot to lie down. Mark exclaims that this moment is unforgettable, and they start to kiss, making beautiful memories of their love. Mark goes up to Francesca and informs her that he needs to remain anonymous. She is confused about why Mark wants to stay hidden, and he repeats that he doesn't want to reveal himself. He explains that he has not spoken to his girlfriend about this book. Francesca completely dismisses his personal life and brings up the fact of sitting on his 30,000 euro copyright. The huge sum of money catches his interest. Mark and Alice are all cozy on the couch, cuddling and watching TV. Out of nowhere, there comes a breaking news on the TV about a book that Mark wrote, so he immediately jumps up and frantically tries to turn off the TV. Mark is later at a cafe with Francesca where they are attending an award ceremony. He makes her promise that she will not utter a word that might land him in trouble with Alice. She gets irritated at his pestering and he gets more nervous. Matters are made worse when the announcer announces that the award goes to Fedor Belvedere for his book, Love Lasts 3 Years. Everyone applauds, and Francesca goes up to receive the award. She clarifies on stage that she is not the author, but only the editor. She delivers Mark's acceptance speech on his behalf, but suspicion grows among people about who the real author is. Mark feels cornered and moves away from the crowd when he feels like people might figure out that he is the author of the award-winning book. Coincidentally, Alice is watching TV and learns from there that Mark is the author of the book. She angrily calls him a big jerk. Meanwhile, Mark tries to hide in the bathroom to escape the reporters, but they manage to find him. Francesca arrives and gives him the heads up to leave, after which He steps out of the restroom and lets his anger out. Some people approach him and sing their praises for his book, and these conversations eventually drive Mac out of the cafe. He rushes back to his home as soon as possible, evading all his new fangirls. When he gets back home, he finds Alice packing her bags. He is still confused about why she is leaving him when she lashes out at him, confronting him about his book. He denies being an author, but she accuses him of being dishonest. They argue and she decides to leave him because she can no longer trust him. This is when he tries to reason with her, explaining that he wrote the book before they met, but Alice doesn't believe him. She professes that this is the last time he's seeing her and leaves. He can't help but confess that he will miss her. He later visits his father in his home and recounts the details of his relationship with Alice. This leads to his father confiding in him too about how he could never recover since Mark's mother left them. His father's fiancée, Yulia, later joins them outside the house as they keep talking and bonding. Mark leaves his father's house shortly after. Mark later meets his mother at a bookstore where she is signing books as he enjoys a drink. Many people approach and praise them for their literary talents. Then, Mark shares with his mother about how Alice left him. In response, his mother comforts him by saying that Alice will eventually find her way back to him if she really loves him. He further brings up the fact that his personality was heavily influenced by both of his parents overlooking and abandoning him when he was born. Mark's mother gives him some motivation to not give up and recognize the importance of fighting for his love. In the end, he expresses his gratitude to his mother and appreciates the advice she gave her. He ends up going out to a strip club, where he watches the performances and has some drinks to take his mind off Alice. He's just enjoying himself and trying to forget about his failed relationship when he meets another girl. He takes her home and gets intimate with her but realizes midway that he's not interested in her. So, he calls Jean to seek help in making the girl leave. Jean comes to his rescue and manages to send the girl away. They chat about Alice and Mark comes across Alice's shirt. He takes a sniff of it to inhale her fragrance. He even finds her perfume and tries to because of how much he misses her. Jean intervenes and calls him crazy while he goes on about his desire to. He wants to be left alone, but she continues to talk to him to offer her support. He later messes up by ruining Peter's wedding as he rambles in his speech about how love is fake. He goes outside Antoine and Alice's house and screams at them but ends up ignored. Then, he writes a heartfelt letter to Alice proclaiming his feelings, followed by many more, but she discards them. He even talks about her in an interview which worries Francesca so much that she calls Alice to watch the interview on live TV. This wins Alice over and she eventually reconciles with Mark at Jean's wedding. They can now share a lovely future ahead.